of the same human community. The third and the most active element of self-compassion is simply to not turn away from what we're noticing or feeling, but to greet it with some kindness. To treat ourselves in the way we would treat a good friend. To give ourselves a little bit of love. And now taking one more deep, delicious inhale. Maybe let it out with a sigh. And slowly opening your eyes, joining our group. Happy midday. So I hope that was helpful. I should have done that at 6 o'clock this morning. Better for it now. So I want to invite a little check-in. How are you doing? How's it going? Who would like to share a little bit? And just raise your hand and we'll find you. No need to be.
I see your hand. Hi, Kate.
Yeah. Hi, Kate.
Hello. Thanks for being here.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Hi, Allie. Yeah, where am I? Where have I not been? I just feel what keeps kind of coming up, that I feel like I'm holding anchor, and this is just all I'm here to do is hold anchor. And then my mind starts to come in and go, you're not doing enough, and so I have this contrast between being in stillness and holding anchor for something and for it feels like the collective, and then wanting to physically actually respond, yet I'm being told to be in stillness. So that's kind of the a little bit of the duality that I have going on within me right now. But I just keep listening to my intuition and holding strong. So
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I super familiar with that tug of war, right? Between action and inaction. And this is sort of imposed inaction in a way that really challenges a lot of us, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how to stay strong in a new way. How to stay grounded in a new way.
Yeah, and I find the more that I am still and the more that I focus on being this pillar of just grounding strength, the more clear, like I didn't even know this was happening until 2 minutes before. It was like, because I haven't really been looking on social media. And I happened to look and there you were. And it was like, oh, okay, I'm doing this. So I just kind of flow with what is asked of me. And it seems to be getting really clear. That is something I'm noticing, is my intuition's getting very clear in the silence.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Who else would like to share?
Haley has a raised hand.
Oh, Haley.
Hi. I wasn't going to share, and sorry I haven't shared my video before this, but I'm in a lot of Zoom meetings these days, and I kind of feel like I need some privacy sometimes. But I'm also trying to get myself out of my comfort zone. And speaking, I am an introvert, so part of this is not a horrible experience, but I'm also feeling out of practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so I need to try and put myself out there a bit. I'm a teacher. So this has been really unique in trying to figure out ways to engage with my students and adjust education and what we see as education right now. And I'm trying to bring some mindfulness and focus on routines and helping my students create self-care plans right now. Mm-hmm. And so I think I just wanted to share that I've been giving my students all sorts of feedback and advice in the last 2 weeks when they've asked me how to deal with stress and anxiety. And I keep giving them advice that I should be taking myself. So I am trying to work on that. But I think it's a good reminder, depending on what everybody's life is like right now, about creating routines for ourselves, whatever that can look like, because it can help us stay in the moment.
Yeah, I so appreciate what you're saying. You're Haley.
It is Hallie.
Hallie. Good. Yeah, I read something in that space too, which was right. This isn't something that we can resist, because in resisting it, we're going to spend a whole lot of energy that possibly could be directed in meaningful ways into, well, how do I adapt to this new norm? What are the habits and the self-care and what are the new rules for me? And they're all really unique too. So I would imagine listening to your kids come up with their self-care lists. What are the routines that keep them intact and safe is really.
Yeah, we've just started the unit, I suppose, as you will. So I've been sharing information about why routines are important and different self-care tactics. So they'll be creating their self-care plans this week. So I'm interested to see what they put together.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And thanks for letting us see you. Anyone else? Liz Rink.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Liz.
Hi. I have been a little distressed because my adult kids live like 3 blocks away. And I have 2 little granddaughters, and it was my granddaughter's 5th birthday on Monday. So I went by and gave her a present, and I did give her a hug, but my kids are like, don't come in, you've got to stay away. And it's heartwarming that my kids are really looking out for me, but it's so, so difficult because we see each other a lot usually.
Yeah. Ouch. Yeah. How do you can I ask you this, Liz?
Sure.
How do you, and if it's too tender, that's fine too. I'm just curious, how do you hold that? How do you work with that for yourself?
Oh, I look on Facebook and see what they've put on Facebook. And then we did do a Zoom with our whole family, which doesn't work very well with 2 and 5-year-old. It's really good for about 5 minutes, and then they start running around screaming. But that's also helpful. And I think when the weather gets better, we'll be able to sit out in the backyard and, you know, throw a ball or do whatever.
Yeah,
When it's warmer. I'm looking forward to that.
me too. Yeah. Thank you, Liz. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. Sometimes this is really difficult. This separation. Sometimes I think you feel strong, and the next moment you're just a pool of tears. And I think it's really useful just to remember that we're all in that same stew right now, and to give each other a lot of grace. I was just kind of teary with my son, and I was like, what is that about? And I wasn't even sure, but I just think overall it's a part of this moment. So thanks for sharing that, Liz. A few more. I'm sure some of these stories resonate with others.
Denise
Yes,
has
Denise.
a hand.
Sure. Thanks again for hosting this. Lovely to see you both and everyone else. I am working in an essential business, so our world has gotten much more complicated and much busier. So I'm also at home now, so I'm finding putting routines in to follow on what others have said is important in order to keep me grounded. So I've been doing yoga every morning, which I don't normally get to do. And now I'm realizing, oh, why can't I do this all the time? So, and obviously it's not in a studio and not with a room full of people, but it is a useful grounding tool for me. And I do also want to share that even though we are isolated, I am finding this big shift in my community of friends and family that we are connecting okay on these tools like Zoom, that it's not the same, but we are able to feel, we are able to share, we're able to connect. And so I am grateful for where the technology has moved in our lifetime to be able to do this. So thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Yeah, I'm so glad you used the word gratitude, right? For the littlest things, even.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so important.
Yes, as one of my family calls this weekend, I have two nieces, a niece and nephew in college, and their life has been rather disrupted as well. And so they jumped on for a minute and were sharing their bemoaning about homework or whatever and their friends not being around. But yet we could still sort of laugh and giggle. So I just think it's connecting the distance in a way that the phone, to me, it's like maybe we won't need phone calls anymore. We should do this always with video now. So that's what I've been thinking.
Beautiful. Thank you. And Denise, thank you for your good work.
We're trying.
I'm sure you guys are. It's good to see you. Big hug to the team. Anyone else?
Ruth, it's Robin.
Hey, Robin.
Hey, I'm not on video because I'm doing spring cleaning and I'm washing my dog today and I'm looking just a little ragged at the coast at my new home.
Oh, beautiful. Well, we're glad you're here.
Well, thank you. And I just wanted to share that it was more than 10 days ago. I have a father who's elderly in northeastern Oregon, and I put myself into quarantine for 2 weeks so that I could go up and help him. He's 89. He's a widower, and so I really changed my life to be helpful for him. And the mentality in some of those rural areas is very different, that they don't see the level of sickness And they feel somewhat immune to it all. And so getting up there and finding out he was still going out on dates and going to people's houses for lunch, and welcoming the house cleaner in who also works at a grocery store. You know, it was very difficult for me because I tried to respect and honor his own decision making, but also was very frustrated that he was not only putting himself in jeopardy, but also me, because I have some underlying health issues.
Mm.
So it was a very frustrating and sad experience. And after 3 days, I fired myself and ended up coming back to the coast where I'm just finding ways to be productive and helpful for other members of my family.
Yeah.
So I will say it has been a frustrating and tearful experience, and has helped me to realize that I have to step back and let people make their own life choices.
Mm. Mm. Wow. That's such a perfect story, Robin. I really appreciate you sharing that. I think it's useful to try to get at like the purity of your intention to serve, and yet ultimately the truth of things, which is that we can't control so much, and we can't control the circumstances. I think we feel that all profoundly right now. And ultimately, we have to take care of ourselves, and we have to draw the boundaries where they're right for each of us, and not beat ourselves up because we can't fix everybody, and we can't get everybody to understand things in the same way. I mean, I think this will be one of the most important lessons of this moment. Anyhow, I just thank you for sharing that. I feel ya.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for being a part of this, and I'm glad you're back home. You know, we're just kind of muddling through, huh? With lots of new material. And yeah, and sometimes the awarenesses are really hard, especially, again, if the practice is to not turn away from it, but to turn towards the enormity of the moment, the complexity of the moment, and then just rest in our own humanity. I hope that you guys are feeling what we believe is essential in this moment, which is community, and that in this funny format of Zoom, we can create community, and we can create a container to share these stories and bump into ourselves in each other's tales, and really use this as a learning moment as much as anything else. So with that, I want to turn it over to my beloved friend, Allie, who's going to talk to us a little bit. I think this is even a perfect segue point. So you go, girl.
Thanks. Thank you all so much for what you've shared. I really appreciate the just honest check-in about exactly where you're at right now in this super weird time. And thank you all very much for making the time to show up. And that practice at the beginning was really lovely, Ruth. Thank you. So I want to talk about a few things today, and you'll see me looking down because I have notes here. So if you have a question at any point, just feel free to raise your hand, your actual hand, or there's a little digital hand you can raise down at the bottom of your screen. I want to start just with a definition of what compassion is, because it's very similar to a lot of other responses and emotions that we have. And I want to just offer the definition so that we can have some clarity about what compassion is. And this definition comes from the research on compassion that's done in the field of contemplative science and neuroscience. So compassion is an awareness of others' suffering, coupled with a willingness to do something to relieve the suffering. And so when we talk about self-compassion, we're sort of turning that willingness to do something to relieve the suffering, we're turning it around toward ourselves. And Ruth went over the definition of self-compassion. It's an awareness of our own suffering, remembering common humanity, that our suffering does not isolate us from others, it actually connects us to others. And then self-kindness, so speaking to ourselves the way that we would speak to a friend. So compassion is an awareness of suffering coupled with a willingness to do something to relieve it. And self-compassion is awareness of our own suffering, common humanity. So I wanted to just offer those definitions. And then I want to talk a little bit about comparative suffering, because I've heard it come up both last week and then again a little bit this week. Is anyone familiar with the term comparative suffering? Is this a new term for you? Okay, so comparative suffering is basically one of the ways that we talk ourselves out of being a part of the circle of compassion. So comparative suffering is can sound like, well, I shouldn't be complaining, or I shouldn't be upset because I'm not homeless, or I shouldn't be suffering and in pain because I have all of my basic needs met and I have supportive family. So why am I feeling so afraid and anxious? So it's sort of comparing our own, whatever suffering we might be experiencing right now, to other people's situations, or what we imagine their situations are, and talking ourselves out of offering ourselves compassion. And this is really, I think, important to be aware of, because it's definitely one of the traps when we start to focus on compassion and cultivate compassion. It's an easy way that we take ourselves out of the game. So any comments or questions on that? So
Can I-
this, yeah.
I'm going to add, this. I'm looking at Shannon on the screen, and we were talking about this last week, right? A little bit, and
yeah, one of my comments is, because obviously I'm in a very I have a lot of empathy, right? That's just kind of how I'm wired or whatever, and so I would love some thoughts or clarity around, not comparing, but holding those two together. So for instance, I'm still able to give myself compassion and self-kindness, while at the same time realizing that there are injustices in the world and vulnerable populations that I'm deeply concerned about and want to give them compassion and empathy at the same time. So again, the duality, it doesn't mean because I'm empathetic and compassionate towards them that I don't have empathy for myself or compassion, but it's holding those, and your definition of compassion, wanting to take action towards what we're seeing, not only for ourselves, but then for others.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Yeah, it's not a black and white. It's not, and I think this is why the term self-compassion is a very new term. It just came about in the last 30 years. Dr. Kristen Neff coined that term. And it actually the term was used as a alternative to the term self-esteem. So self-esteem includes a lot of building ourselves up by comparing ourselves to others in terms of achievements or ability, whereas self-compassion really brings online that common humanity. So remembering that whatever I'm experiencing is part of something that other humans also experience. So the term is new, and it can be a little bit problematic because compassion itself always includes the self. So there's no division in traditional, for example, traditional Buddhist understanding. There's no difference between self and other. And so when we have compassion for ourselves, that is a form of compassion for others. And when we have compassion for others, that's a way of experiencing compassion for ourselves. And I'm sure that we all kind of naturally know this. When we help someone else, we feel a benefit. It's a really profoundly connecting experience to help others. And so, yeah, Shannon, I think what you're pointing to right now in this moment is really interesting, because compassion is a very activating response to suffering. So there's this urge to do something and take action and help. And right now, what we're being asked to do to help is to stay put and basically do nothing. So I'm feeling that tension myself. The reason why I think comparative suffering is important is that a lot of the courses that I teach, especially here in Bend, this idea of having so much privilege comes up a lot. So a lot of us are very aware of how privileged we are, and also connected to communities that are not. And so I just want to encourage us to not use that as a reason to deny ourselves compassion. And I hear that that's not an issue for you, which is good. But it can be a way of talking ourselves out of, I'm not going to deal with my own fear and anxiety because I could have it so much worse. A good analogy that I like for this is in 12-step programs, when you have a room full of people who are all attempting to get sober. That is really important for each individual. And so if you were in an AA meeting and saying to yourself, well, I can't get sober because that person over there is an addict and homeless, it just doesn't make any sense. So compassion is a resource that's always available to us. And the more we use it, both directed toward ourselves and others, the more we have of it. So it's not a limited resource. And then that leads me to speaking a little bit about the difference between empathy and compassion. So often these terms are used interchangeably, or they're used and not defined often. Empathy is the ability that we have to put ourselves in another person's shoes and imagine what life might be like for them. And empathy often includes a lot of feeling with another person. So empathy, we can experience empathy when people are happy, when they're joyful, when they're in gratitude. And we can also experience empathy when people are suffering and in pain. Whereas compassion is always and only a response to suffering. So compassion only arises in response to suffering, and it's that powerful urge to do something to relieve suffering. So empathy fatigue, the research is showing empathy fatigue can lead to burnout. So if we're stuck in that place of empathizing and feeling with people, and we're not able to move through that into a compassionate action, then that's what can lead to burnout and fatigue. And some of the new research is showing that compassion can actually prevent empathy fatigue and burnout, because it brings online this powerful motivation and willingness to take action in a way that's a little bit different than empathy. So I've noticed both in my own experience and then also working with people who are highly empathic, that the cultivation of compassion actually is sort of like a switch, moving out of empathy and into compassion, gives us fuel and a resource that is really powerful and allows us to move out of that feeling with zone. So I don't know if it's helpful to hear that, but maybe just that's something to play with in your own experience. Just sort of notice, okay, am I stuck in that feeling with mode? Compassion does not always require feeling with. So compassion does require an ability to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and relate to what they may be going through. But we don't have to feel a lot of emotion to be having a compassionate response. So any comments or questions about that?
I think that's super helpful, Allie. And because I've definitely had what I called maybe compassion fatigue, but maybe it was empathy fatigue in just being in the space that I work in with vulnerable populations. Do you have a little bit more like moving from kind of that cerebral connection to practices that allow you to do that? So make sort of that switch, I think, just from like a pragmatic, how to start building those muscles, if that's, you know, sort of a new exercise.
Yeah, for sure. So that's a great segue and good time actually to go into a compassion practice. And does anyone else have any comments or questions before we move into a practice that will give you a taste of how to cultivate compassion?
I just want to offer a book that I have found myself referencing a lot of late, and it's a book by a teacher, Roshi Joan Halifax. Some of you might know her. It's called Standing at the Edge, and it deals with this the very thing that we're talking about here about compassion fatigue, pathological altruism. She has 5 edge states that she identifies, and she identifies what it looks like when you go kind of over the edge, and versus what it's like to just stand at the edge, stand grounded and in touch with yourself. And this kind of goes back to what Robin spoke to about, I'm just going to go home and regroup, and why that is actually a very selfless move to take care of ourselves and to understand where the ground is for us, so that we have the spaciousness, if you will, to turn towards circumstances and individuals in particular who are in need, and know what it is that we're feeling, and also know what is called right action, because it's so easy to be overwhelmed and to want to do so much because you feel so much. But what is it to just, as she would describe too, bear witness to the pain and then choose. Mm-hmm. So anyhow, it's a book I've found to be really a great resource in this way.
Yeah, there's some, there's quite a lot of discussion in the field about compassion fatigue as a term being actually often is actually empathy fatigue. And the new research coming out of Germany is showing that the parts of the brain that are involved in empathic response and compassionate response are actually completely separate regions of the brain that get activated, and they don't overlap. And so often when I read or hear about people describing compassion fatigue, what I'm actually hearing is empathy fatigue. It's that stuckness in the feeling and the resonating with someone else that can feel very sticky. Whereas compassion to me feels more clean, like I can maybe have a resonance of a feeling, but it moves through more quickly. So there's lots of resources we could follow up. I'm not sure if we have everyone's emails, but anyway, let's do a practice. So we're going to do a meditation it'll start with compassion for a loved one to help us kind of feel what that feels like in our own body. And then we'll move into self-compassion, and then we'll broaden it back out to compassion for others. Okay, so go ahead and find a comfortable seat to do some meditation for a few minutes. And as Ruth said in the beginning, find a posture that feels comfortable and yet is where with your spine straight, maybe connected to a feeling of dignity in your own body. Shoulders back. You want to be comfortable, but not too comfortable so you don't fall asleep. You're welcome to close your eyes or cast your gaze down toward the floor or the desk in front of you. And we'll start with a few deep breaths in and out. Feel the support of the chair, or the couch, or the cushion where you're sitting. Feel relaxation in your forehead, your eyes, your jaw, shoulders, belly. Just notice if you feel the peacefulness of just breathing, being supported in this moment by the breath. Now, in your mind's eye, imagine and picture someone that you love very much. Vividly imagine this person standing in front of you. Picture their face, their expression. Notice how you feel when you think of this loved one. Notice any feelings of gratitude, affection, warmth, or caring. And now remember or imagine a time when this loved one was suffering in some way. Maybe they were frustrated, disappointed. Maybe they experienced a loss or an illness. Notice how you feel when you think of this loved one suffering. Notice if you feel any feeling of tenderness or a desire to help, an urge to reach out. And silently recite these phrases for your friend or loved one. May you be free from suffering. May you be free from fear and anger. May you know peace and joy. And now drop the image of this loved one and gently bring focus back to the breath. And now bring to mind a time in your life when you were suffering in some way. And this could be very recent. Maybe you turned on the news and felt fear and anxiety or anger. Maybe you were sick or in pain or worried about your loved ones. Notice how you feel when you remember this experience. And just as you responded to the suffering of a loved one with compassion and kindness, notice that you can offer yourself this same compassion. You can hold the suffering, the fear, anxiety, anger, or pain with tenderness and concern. So with the same feelings of warmth and caring that you might offer a loved one, silently repeat these phrases for yourself. May I be free from this suffering. May I be free from fear and anger. May I know peace and joy. And now consider the possibility that this experience of pain or suffering, this grief, anxiety, or loneliness does not isolate you from others, but it's part of the experience of being human. Just like you, countless other people know what it's like to feel pain, grief, self-doubt, and fear. Although the circumstances and the details may be different, you can feel the connection to others through the common humanity of experiencing the ups and downs of life. Consider the possibility that reducing your own suffering helps to reduce the suffering of others. And offering compassion to yourself and others is a way of generating more and more compassion in the world. So as you breathe now, imagine opening your heart to this shared experience of facing a global pandemic. Imagine that you could breathe out compassion for yourself and the countless others on the planet who may be suffering in a similar way. So on the inhale, open yourself to this experience. And on the exhale, send out compassion to yourself and others who are also suffering. And silently recite May we all be free from this suffering. May we all find peace and joy. And as this session draws to a close, let your heart be touched by your own willingness to care for your own needs and the needs of others. And rest your mind on the natural rhythm of your breath. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. So any comments or observations about that practice that you'd like to share? Irene, hi.
Hi. Yeah, I was struck by how deeply I felt for the other person. It was my mom. And then how those feelings weren't as deep for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of being able to pull that in. And it reminded me of last week when we went through the guided imagery and we gave ourselves a hug. And I didn't realize how much I needed that, that hug. Yeah.
Right.
So this is, I think, really calling to me to continue to create that space ongoingly for my own self-compassion.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Irene. That's actually an excellent observation to notice the difference in how easy it is to offer compassion to others and how the difference in the ease there versus how it is to offer it to ourselves. And for those of you who were not here last week, Ruth walked us through a self-compassion practice where you can rest your hand over your heart. That's super calming and activates the soothing system, the parasympathetic system. Or you can just even wrap your arms around yourself like you're giving yourself a hug. And so those are just quick ways to offer yourself a little moment of compassion when you're feeling anxiety or fear or stress. So thanks, Irene. Any other comments or observations?
Yes, I had sort of a different response that surprised me is as I was trying to, picturing someone that I loved, and I pulled up in my mind like my husband and my children and everything. I think this is a little odd, but I could not pull forth the feelings that I do have now when I think about them. I mean, I have a lot of love for the members of my family, but in that moment, I just couldn't connect that feeling of caring and compassion. And I'm not sure if it's because of the work that I do. I don't know if that makes sense, and needing to kind of shut off a lot of the time. But I was struck by it and had to kind of really think through experiences to pull forth that warmth.
Thanks for sharing that, Maria. Good to see you.
Yeah.
I think the feelings are not always there. That's actually pretty common. So sometimes in a compassion meditation, you might feel a lot of feeling. Other times it's just not there at all. But the importance is just the willingness to kind of go through it and as an exercise. It's sort of like when an athlete visualizes a race before they run. We're evoking what is the compassionate response. We're visualizing it and evoking it almost like preparing for a race. but we're preparing to help. So sometimes there's a lot of feeling, other times there's not. It's just all part of it, and it's just good to notice and be aware. I think just knowing your line of work, what happens often when we're guarding against empathic fatigue is there can be a guarding that happens that protects us so that we don't get stuck in empathy fatigue, but it also can change our ability to relate to those that we love too. So if we're guarding and protecting against that empathic response, that's why it leads to burnout actually, because it reduces our ability to feel the full range of feelings. Mm-hmm. So both on the joy side, but also on the pain side, which is again another reason why compassion is so important. Is it allows us to be okay with experiencing that fuller range of emotional experience.
Thank you.
Yeah, Katie. And if anyone needs to leave, we're right at 1. Please feel free to take off.
Marla, I've related to that a lot over these meditations, and Allie, that helped a lot in hearing like some of the reasons for that. I struggle with pulling in relationships of people that I can feel that compassion or connection to, and I have found, like, I think that for me, it's that, like, those relationships are complicated, and your response, Allie, helped to play into that of where my emotions are, but then pulling in, like, an animal, I found it doesn't need to be any specific animal, but just, like, a dog that I can cuddle with or something like that has helped to bring that in. But I really appreciate both of your insights and sharings about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, sometimes animals are really good loved ones to work with because they're so easy. Our loved ones, those can be very complicated, challenging relationships, even if we love people very much. I think there's a lot of myths about compassion. A lot of people associate it with being super emotional and weepy and nice, and it's actually not any of those things. It can be weepy and emotional sometimes, but that's actually not the definition of compassion. It's a very strong commitment to relieve suffering when and where we can. So that's all it is. All the other stuff about being nice and having huge emotional responses, that's just that can be extra sometimes, but it's not necessary for compassion. I saw one more hand and then we'll wrap up. Yeah, June.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Gail. So what I really enjoyed about this is that we didn't do the self-compassion for someone we didn't like. Because that's the other option. And right now, I need all the self-compassion, I can give and or I can get, and it's okay to give it to the loved ones and that. So, and I don't see it as a selfish act because I know what I need in these moments. So there was joy that I didn't have to give it away to, in my energy away to a space that's, for me, didn't need it. So that I really enjoyed. And the other thing that tonight has also reminded me, and it's where I am, it's nearly 10 o'clock at night now. So it's the end of the day for me. And Ruth, you saw me, Gail, you saw me at the end of the night last night, and I was a completely different person. I was broken. And the last 3 days have been completely different emotions for me. And, coming close to ourselves, David White's poem, Start Close In. And even though during this time where everybody's isolated and that, I'm coming even closer, and I'm going even slower.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been, I think, a revelation for me, because the pace is always pushing, and outside circumstances are also always forcing you into a certain trajectory. But if you can slow it down, really slow it down for your needs, I think that also can have a massive shift on things. So not only coming close, coming towards yourself with the self-compassion, but bringing your own pace to it as well. Mm-hmm. That's been a very big awakening for me in these last 3 days.
Yeah,
thank you for that guiding. It was lovely.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that you mentioned pace, June, because right now I feel like there's such a urge to reach out and connect and help and do things where we can to help people. And we're in it for the long haul. It seems like this is going to last for a while. And so pacing, I think, is really important. Speaking of which, I'm so sorry we've gone over. I try really hard to not do that, and we're about 5 minutes over right now. So, Ruth, I know you had a closing poem to offer, and I look forward to next week. So thank you all.
Indeed. Yeah, stay if you can. This is a short poem, and if you have to leave, we hope we see you again, and we hope this was helpful. It's just kind of what Allie and I do, and we hope it's useful to you because it's useful to us. The poem I want to share with you guys, and if you can stay, I invite you just to close your eyes for a second and let these beautiful words from Mary Oliver land. And many of you will recognize this poem. It's one of my favorites. It's called Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair. Tell me about yours. I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clear blue sky, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. Thank you very much. We'll hopefully see some of you next week at noon. Take good care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.